let's talk a little bit about who Edcite is as a company. We as a company want to support uh, schools and teachers and ultimately students. We want to have a positive impact on kids. And so when we think about what is the philosophy really driving the products at Edcite, it's this belief that feedback and really good feedback drives growth. And we believe that the way that you get to really strong feedback and strong information is through aligned assessments and actionable data. And so this is just a quick overview of the different products and services that Edcite does offer. So we'll primarily talk about our Edcite Schools premium assessment platform and our DataHub by Edcite, which is a centralized data system. But some services that are great at supporting the implementation of both of those. We've got professional development. That's always, there's a portion of that built into any rollout. Yeah, but there's always the option of additional on-site or virtual PD. There are content services provided by the Edcite team. So whether that is taking existing paper pencil assessments that your team has and digitizing those onto Edcite. And so you can use our team and purchase those services. There's also options depending on what curriculum products you're using. We've got different partnerships, and so we can always introduce you to a good curriculum partner if, let's say, you're looking for a math curriculum with Edcite assessments already built in. And then integration, so we'll talk a little bit at the end about SFTP syncs, but there's also just different options to make sure you can get your data out of Edcite in an easy way. So that's the high level overview of who we are, what we believe, and what we offer. Now let's start talking about assessments. Now, when we're talking about meeting your assessment needs and meeting them well, we're talking about everything you're doing in terms of measuring student understanding. We're talking district-wide common assessments, school-based common assessments, where your teacher teams are building collaboratively. We're looking at teacher-driven common assessments where maybe I'm sharing an exit ticket with my teacher best friend and we're going to give it as a common assessment. And then there's those individual classroom assignments, those homeworks, those quizzes. So whether it's a very formal summative assessment or it's an on-the-fly formative quick check-in, Edcite's going to be able to support that. So we're going to dive now into the assessment technology and how we align to all of the different needs that your K through 12 all subject areas are going to have. So when we talk about aligned assessments, we often talk about it in terms of the item types, the tools, the interface, because we want to make sure that you have good tools, good question types to assess in an authentic way. So that means that if I'm asking students to show their understanding of graphing quadratic functions, I'm not reducing that assessment item to just pictures of different quadratic equations or quadratic functions. I'm actually having them graph them. Or if I'm assessing a listening and speaking skill, I'm actually letting them record themselves speak their answer. And so we want to make sure that you've got question types that really align with the skills you want to measure. We also want to make sure that you have all of the question types and tools that students are going to see on those end of year state tests, because the reality is those have huge implications for our students, for our teachers, for our schools. We want to make sure students know how to show how much they learned, how to use those tools. And it's also just an equity issue in terms of I need to know how to use the accommodations that are provided to me if I'm going to have a meaningful accommodation even offered. So if I'm a student that gets magnified text or text to speech, if I don't know how to access that come that end of year state assessment, well, then I really didn't have that accommodation available to me. So Edcite wants to make sure students know how to use those tools. They know how to access everything they need so they can show what they know. So I'm going to quickly go through just some examples of question types and tools. So here's an example of a drag and drop, and you'll notice that this has that look and feel of the state test for some of our assessments if you're in Arkansas, for example, or if you're in Massachusetts. So a lot of our states, there are states that use the same assessment look and feel. So you'll see different screenshots or GIFs throughout the presentation of different state views. But this is just an example of a timeline or a number line drag and drop. This is done for math, but you could easily use this for social studies, doing a timeline of events. This is looking at a speaking and listening skill. Really great for those speaking listening standards, but also if you have English language learners that need to practice with some of those ELL assessment items for the end of the year. So students can actually record themselves, they can listen to audio, which is really powerful. This is also used a lot in our K1 and 2 classrooms, where they want students to explain how they would approach a problem. I also really like, I can record answers. I can also attach pictures of answers. This became really big during the pandemic in terms of, teachers being able to see student thinking, because it's great to get online, get that auto grading in there, get those technology enhanced items and tools, but sometimes you still want students drawing something on paper, showing their scratch work with a pen or pencil. And so this is an example of how all of the question types on Edcite allow you to actually attach a picture either from your webcam or from a file on your computer, and that becomes available for the teacher if they want to dig into that student thinking behind the answer. Because if I get this auto-graded question and I see a lot of my students, they picked a particular answer, I might wonder, well, how in the world did they get that? And being able to pull up that student work allows me to dive into those misconceptions. And to show you what that can look like, Edcite auto-grades everything that can be auto-graded, that there is a correct answer. And then teachers can grade anything that is that more open-ended, basically a record audio, an essay. You are able to automatically grade like all of those math questions. You can grade by conditions, you can grade based on allow equivalence. So there's a lot of auto grading, but if I need to go in and do any grading, I can go to my grading page. If I want to go in and dig into the student work, I can also do that from my grading page. So I think that's a pretty awesome feature. While we're thinking about grading, I will just say that especially for ELA teachers, if you want to add a rubric, you're also able to grade on a rubric. So anything that does require teacher grading, I can just go click on those boxes so students are getting their scores and their feedback in that format. In line with the recording or attaching, this would be a record audio question type more along the lines of an accommodation. So on my essay tool, if I, let's say I'm putting out an essay question, but I have a student who has written into their IEP that they need to be able to speak their answer, maybe they have a scribe, students can use the microphone within the essay question type to actually speak their answer, and then the teacher can listen back. Or, a support person could go in and type that answer, but it doesn't have to be in that moment sitting with the student. They've got that microphone there. This is another just quick look at some of our drag and drop question types. This is a grade 1 assessment, which has an audio clip built in. It's got a lot of nice images in here. This is actually a released OELPA reading practice recreated on Edcite. This is another drag and drop, but showing you with some text. I often see our foreign language teachers at the high school level absolutely loving the fill in those closed exercises. You're able to add timers to assessments. So if I say, you know what, everyone's getting 45 minutes to complete this, I can turn that timer function on. And once it hits 45 minutes, it's going to automatically submit that assessment to make sure everyone's getting the same amount of time. You know, I talk about how we support K through 12, and we've got all of these different tools and question types. And I like to give some specific attention to science with this particular simulation. So PhET is a great organization based out of University of Colorado, and they've got these awesome science simulations. Well, Edcite wants you to be able to take those really awesome simulations or videos or images and embed them into your assessments. So this is an example of how a science teacher could essentially make a lab and embed a simulation where students are building their skate park and then answering questions about the skills after they play and manipulate that simulation. Here's another example of a question type. This is really showing how I can use the tabs that are in our question editor to provide students multiple pieces of information to engage with. Oftentimes, this is used for paired passages, or if I'm a social studies teacher, maybe different primary sources for some document-based questions. In this example, the teacher actually had a graphic novel that they were doing with students, and they made each page a different, well, each tab a different page of the graphic novel, and then asked questions at the bottom. Some additional tools in terms of time, we talked a little bit about making sure we meet all students' needs, and sometimes that means giving extended time. So I showed that timer a couple of slides ago. I can also turn off the timer for particular students or groups of students. And this is really just, again, examples of question types. So I can do drag and drops in so many different forms. This is a geometry question type. They're doing some proofs. And this really shows, okay, maybe it's great that we have all these question types and functions, but how easy is it to build? And the reality is, the question editors are pretty simple, really consistent. And when I build something, I can preview it, see exactly what students would see, and see that immediate feedback they get. So in this example, it's a graphing question, and the rich feedback that students get with both the image and the equation written out, I think that's really powerful for both students and teachers to see. And the take home for this slide is that it can be done pretty simply. Now, if I'm creating questions, I want to make sure I've got the right question type for what I'm teaching. And that means that Edcite's got a lot of question types. And so we've got more than 60 types of questions to ensure that whether you are teaching first grade reading or you're teaching AP stats, that you have all of the question types and tools that you specifically will need. And so when we onboard teams, we do like to do some subject-specific support and guidance, because your ELA teachers probably do not care about all of the graphing tools and calculator functions. But your math teachers, in the same vein, probably don't want to look at the Venn diagram question type. And so there's a lot of question types, but don't worry, we do provide support to make sure the right question types are being found by the different teams that you support. So let's move now from just what are the assessment capabilities to how do I take those assessment capabilities and roll it out as a common assessment. So on Edcite, when we talk about a common assessment, we're talking about something that is given by multiple teachers. That content is locked to make sure that they are giving the same assessment. Want to make sure everyone's giving the same test if we're going to be looking at an aggregate report. So multiple teachers, locked content, aggregated data. And once you've got all of those things, you then get to look at things from that holistic team, school, district perspective. And so a little bit about the common assessment capabilities. Now, we talked about how you can make all of these question types, you can turn on all of these tools. So how do I go from there to then giving a common assessment? Well, the first piece is how can I share this with my colleagues? And how can I organize the questions that I'm building for that common assessment building process? So Edcite allows you to build a folder structure for your team. And so you might have a science folder for all of your 8th grade science teachers, or maybe it's just your curriculum coaches that are going to be building these assessments. And so they can have a shared folder similar to a Google Drive folder or a OneDrive folder. And I can share questions and assessments into that folder. And once we have built something, or let's say we go to the item bank, Edcite's item bank has more than 250,000 items in it ready to go. Let's say that I grab some of those if I'm not creating from scratch. Whatever items or content I find, I can move it into a folder, and from there, it can be pushed out as a common assessment. Now, we talked at the beginning that there are so many different assessments going on at schools, and so that's why we have 2 different pathways that teams will either use one, the other, or a combination of both to support common assessments at their school or district. So the first one we'll talk about is more of a top-down administrator scheduled. And so that administrator could be a grade level chair. It could be a curriculum coach. It could be a principal or someone from the district. But basically, someone with the privileges of pushing out an assessment across multiple teachers' classrooms has set up an assessment. And that looks like, we've got a GIF that I'll run through a couple times, but I can find that assessment that was shared into my folder. I can say, I want to distribute this to my different teachers, and then I can make what's called a distribution. So you can see I checkbox an assessment, I create a distribution, I name it, maybe this is our Unit 1 assessment. I select which grade levels and subjects I want to push this out to. I assign it to those classes, and now all of the students in those classes will have access to this test within the window that I turn on. So it's very easy for everybody else because literally the administrator set it up. The rest of the team is proctoring the assessment. Now, the other pathway is if instead of having an administrator actually push it out, you can allow teams to share common assessments with each other and schedule it when it works for them. So that's that teacher-assigned common assessment pathway. And I forgot to add that one in. But what that's going to do is that's going to allow teachers to share an assignment into that shared folder that we talked about, and then the rest of their team just goes to that folder and they're going to see an assign button. So both pathways work for pushing out an assessment, whether it's an administrator or it's just teachers sharing with their colleagues and not as formal of an assessment. Okay, and whether something is a district distributed common assessment or a teacher assigned common assessment, you are able to manage the implementation. So we'll dive into this a bit more in the reports, but this is just to show you that while students are taking an assessment or during an assessment window, you have live data. So I can see if I pushed out an assessment across 2 schools, let's say, I can see what percentage have opened the assessment, what percentage have completed the assessment. I can view that by school, by teacher, by class. So if I'm a principal, I can view this by teacher or class and follow up with the appropriate teachers about, hey, make sure we're finishing this up within the time window. If I'm a district level administrator, I could view this by school and say, oh, I'm going to follow up with these school leaders to make sure that their schools are finishing things within the appropriate time window. And then as a teacher, I can look at this by class or by student and really see, okay, I need to follow up with these kids. They're still only halfway through the assessment. So definitely, in order to give a common assessment and look at that data, we need to make sure everyone finishes the assessment. And that's where having tools to really manage the implementation are so key. One thing I did want to shout out is that, Edcite has so many tools, so many question types. We also have a lot of assignment settings to make sure that you can make your assessments very secure when you need to. So this is a table that goes through different settings for formative and summative setups. But I wanted to draw particular attention to our option to require a secure browser and limit access to specific windows. So if you want to have students in that lockdown view, they can't open other tabs, they can't open any other window. That requires secure browser, turns their computer into that kiosk mode so they can only work on the assessment in front of them. And then limiting access allows students to complete an assessment over multiple days or multiple times, but not have access to it when they go home. Now, I mentioned earlier that it's so important to us that we are supporting all students and giving students all of the tools that they need. And one of the ways we want to empower teams to be able to do that consistently is by giving tools at the group level. So students can be added to a particular group and you can turn on accommodations for that group, and those accommodations will follow students to every assessment they take. So if I know these 3 students have to have magnified text, I can say, okay, this group, I'm going to turn on very large text. So whether they're doing an exit ticket or they're giving our district summative, they're going to have that accommodation turned on always. And I don't have to ask my teachers to make an additional copy or turn it on for particular students. It's just always on because it's set at the student group level. Another thing that I wanted to point out in terms of supporting all learners, if we're thinking about it instead of an accommodation perspective, but looking at it from a misconception or instructional needs perspective, making sure that we are responding to what students have shown us they need extra support on. All of the reports on Edcite allow you to create groups. So I can look at a particular answer choice in that item analysis, create a group based on that misconception and send them extra practice or progress monitor their performance on the next assignment. And this really is kind of continuing in this idea of how do I make sure students are getting all of the support they need? If I have, let's say, a SPED teacher that is pushing into my class, I need to make sure that they have access to everything in that class, that they can send assignments to those students. Co-teachers is something that I think is really powerful. Being able to add a co-teacher really easily to any class is something that a lot of teams use to make sure students have all of the adult support that they need. Now, when we shift from question types tools, and I know we are getting close to time, question types tools, implementing common assessments, after you do all of that, you want to then use that data to drive your response. So data and reporting on Edcite is instant. So I was showing you some of those real-time reports. We want to make sure that the data is immediately accessible to the appropriate people. So if I'm a coach, I'm seeing the data that I should have access to at the schools that I support. If I'm a principal, I'm seeing my campus. If I'm a teacher, I'm seeing my classes. And then actionable, I want to make sure that I can do something with these reports. So a quick shout out to how we can give permissions. You can say, I want to give all of my principals access to their own school and all grade levels. Maybe for my grade level chair, I want to give them access to data at their own school, their own grades. If I have a specific person that needs to have a select set of schools, maybe this coach supports these 3 schools for 7th and 8th grade. You can set up permissions in a really flexible way. And if you're bringing that data in from Clever or ClassLink or some external system and there are roles associated in that system, then on Edcite, you create that role and you give that role the appropriate permissions. So you can give the appropriate data access. You can also give tech support access to teacher accounts, student accounts, classes, and then there's content access. So there's a robust user management portion for all of those school and district accounts. In terms of reports, and we're going to go ahead, we're going to be a little bit over time, and I'm sorry about that, everyone, but if you need to jump off, that is okay. We will still have the recording to view if you need to. Now, data and reporting, there are so many reports within Edcite for you to analyze the assessments that your team is giving on the Edcite platform. So single assignment is going to let you deep dive into the specific reports or into that specific assessment. So whether I'm doing item analysis, looking at the overall performance in the summary report, it's a very direct look at that assessment. Standards allow me to look at multiple assignments across a certain amount of time and see all of the standards performance over that. You can do a deep dive into a particular student. You can look at growth and pre and post tests. You can do a lot of deep analysis. So to run through these slides pretty quickly, this is actually the slide we looked at earlier in terms of live progress, that I can see all of that data, and it shows off our data by dropdown, that any report I see as an administrator on Edcite, I can view grouped by school, teacher, class, or student. This is an example of our summary report where I've got a graphic at the top and a table at the bottom. I can view that data by aggregate, so their overall score. I can view it by question, by standard, and I can view that in percent or point. I can also see at the very bottom, the average of everyone within that filtered set that I'm looking at versus the district average. So that's something nice for teachers. They're just going to see their students, but they can always see the district average at the very bottom. And all of these reports you can export to CSV, you can copy to clipboard, and you can print easily. This is an example of showing our performance band report. So it's giving you percentage and counts of students by proficiency, and your team can actually set those performance bands, the colors, the labels, the cut scores, and that can be done as a default for all reports and also done on an assignment by assignment basis. And on this report, I can click on a particular proficiency, on a particular standard, and I can see that list of students. And just to be clear, this is all fake data. These are not real. So this is a good look of how reports are actionable. I can see, oh, I've got 3 students in this advanced category. Even though I'm going to remediate, I'm going to pull this group of 3 and I'm going to send them some enrichment practice. So this is showing the actionable part. If we want to look at some of the filters, on the left, you can filter by classes, by schools, by teacher. You can also filter by student group. So whether that's an instructional group or a demographic group, and I can drill down into that particular performance. This is a quick glance at some of our growth reports. So again, I can view that by school, by class, by teacher, by student. And I can look at that as the line chart or toggle over to just a what's the percentage growth by domain or standard. And I do want to just shout out that all of the data within Edcite belongs to the school or district. So at the end of the day, we know that this student data is yours, and we always want to make sure that you're able to use that data to do what's best for students. And a lot of times that means you need to be able to take that data out of Edcite. And that's something that we're always going to be supportive and a true partner in. And so we always offer SFTP syncing as part of an Edcite Schools purchase. And when you purchase Edcite Schools, if an API or a custom database is something that you want to explore, that's something that we can also talk about, because that's an option as well. Now, if you don't have a data warehouse that you need to take your data out of Edcite and put it into, but you want something that can host more than just Edcite data. So I want to be able to look at my common assessment data with my state test scores, with my attendance data. Well, that's what DataHub is. So DataHub by Edcite brings all of those different sources to give you a really robust look at student performance and student needs at your schools. When we talk about teachers using data, there is consistency in what is challenging for teams. There's not enough time. There's just too many different platforms and programs, too much data, and that the data is not timely. So we wanted to be able to solve those. And so DataHub in practice would help a teacher that has parent-teacher meetings, student conferences, IEP meetings, weekly check-ins, and a shared planning period. All of those different things that they have to prepare for, and all the different sources they have to pull from to be prepared for those. And we put it into a central system. So they can say, I'm going to this meeting today. Okay, what do I need for that meeting? I need attendance data. I need the last 5 assessments we've done on Edcite. I need their STAR data. I need their MAP data. I click on my dashboard and it's automatically up to date with the recent data or with the historically updated data. So this is where, we go from saying, the data can be so powerful and asking teachers to do so much work to get to that end result, to offering a simple solution that's feasible. So those templates can be designed based on the meetings that your teams are having, based on the reports that you have to run on a regular basis. And so you make sure that they fit the sources that your team uses and the needs that you have for data. And then you can build in the appropriate dashboards with the appropriate filters and actionable items. So for teams that want to make the transition to Edcite, we have a very robust support team that helps set up your account. We guide you through the whole process with questions and making sure that you have what you need. So from setting up your account to actually using data effectively, we're a true partner in making sure that this will be successful. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there.